In the summer of 1683, the fate of Europe hung on the edge of a sword. From the east, the Ottoman Empire advanced with a force of more than 150,000 men. Their banners darkened the horizon, their cannons made the earth tremble. For 60 days, they had besieged Vienna, the jewel of the Holy Roman Empire, convinced that the city would fall before the first autumn leaves touched the ground. But something was moving in the hills to the north, something that Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa had not foreseen. And then, on the afternoon of September 12th, the sky tore open. From the crests of Mount Kahlenberg descended a thunder that did not come from the clouds. It was the pounding of 20,000 hooves against the rocky slope. The wind carried a sound that no one had ever heard before. A sharp and chilling whistle, as if 1,000 eagles were descending upon the battlefield. The feathered wings swayed on the riders' backs. Lances 6 meters long gleamed under the dying sun. Sabers flashed. Hooves churned the earth. And at the head of that avalanche of steel rode a king. The Ottoman lines shuddered, horses bolted, standards fell. Men who had conquered empires retreated for the first time before something they could not comprehend. It was not an army. It was a storm made of iron, feathers, and fury. When the dust settled, the greatest empire in the world lay humiliated in an Austrian valley. And the echo of that charge would cross the centuries as proof that history can change in half an hour. This is the story of how a secret weapon destroyed the Ottoman dream of conquering Europe. For more than a century, the Ottoman Empire had been the most feared force in the known world. From the sands of Arabia to the mountains of the Balkans, their armies knew no defeat. Constantinople, the city that for 1,000 years had been the heart of Eastern Christianity, had fallen to their swords in 1453. Belgrade followed after. Hungary fragmented under their weight, and with each victory, the empire looked further west toward the heart of Europe, toward a city that symbolized everything it did not yet possess: Vienna. The capital of the Holy Roman Empire was more than a city. It was the gateway. Whoever controlled Vienna would control the trade routes to Germany, Italy, and the Mediterranean. Whoever possessed Vienna would have the road open to Rome. And for Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, the second most powerful man in the Ottoman Empire after Sultan Mehmed IV, that gateway had to open in 1683. Kara Mustafa was a man of boundless ambition. Tall, dark-faced, and with a piercing gaze, he had risen from the lowest ranks of power to become the Sultan's right hand. But it was not enough for him to rule in another's name. He wanted the glory that not even Suleiman the Magnificent had achieved: to take Vienna. In 1529, the great Suleiman had failed before its walls. Kara Mustafa dreamed of triumphing where the greatest of sultans had failed. In the spring of that year, the empire set itself in motion. From Istanbul departed columns of soldiers that seemed to have no end. Janissaries in white turbans, the elite of the Ottoman infantry, marched with iron discipline. Sipahi cavalry with armor that gleamed like mirrors. Tatars from the steppes, riders swift as the wind, engineers, sappers, artillerymen, carts loaded with gunpowder, provisions, and the tools of siege. More than 150,000 men crossed the Balkans in a column that took days to pass a single point. On the other side of the horizon, Emperor Leopold I received increasingly alarming reports. The numbers seemed impossible. Spies reported figures that no Christian army could match. And when the magnitude of the threat became undeniable, Leopold made a decision that his critics would call cowardice. He abandoned Vienna and fled west to Linz, leaving the defense of the capital in the hands of 15,000 soldiers and one man, Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. Starhemberg was everything his emperor was not. A veteran of countless campaigns, he bore the scars of war etched into his body and soul. When he received the order to defend Vienna, he did not protest nor ask for reinforcements he knew would not arrive in time. He simply nodded, unrolled the maps of the city, and began to prepare the most desperate resistance Europe had ever witnessed. On the 14th of July, 1683, the southern horizon of Vienna darkened. It was not a storm approaching. It was the Ottoman tents spreading as far as the eye could see, a white sea of fabric and steel surrounding the city like a serpent squeezing its prey. Kara Mustafa established his headquarters in a green tent as large as a palace, decorated with gold and silk, a symbol of the victory he took for granted. That night, as the Ottoman drums resonated in the darkness, the defenders of Vienna looked from the walls at the ocean of campfires surrounding them. No one spoke of hope, only of resistance. And on the lips of every soldier formed the same silent question: how long before it all ends? The first cannon shots fell before dawn. Stones the size of men crashed against the walls of Vienna with a thunder that woke the entire city. Children cried, church bells tolled, not in celebration but in warning. The siege had begun. During the first weeks, Kara Mustafa tested the defenses with the patience of one who knows he has all the time in the world. His engineers dug trenches that snaked toward the walls like rivers of earth. His artillerymen adjusted the range of the cannons day after day, each shot more precise than the last. But the Grand Vizier did not want to destroy Vienna. He wanted to capture it intact, with all its treasures, its palaces, and its glory. A ruin would not serve him, a trophy would. Within the walls, Starhemberg walked among his men like a tireless ghost. He slept only a few hours. He ate the same as his soldiers. When a section of the wall trembled under the impact of projectiles, he was there supervising repairs before the dust settled. His presence was a silent message. If he did not surrender, no one would. Days turned into weeks, weeks into a month. August arrived with a suffocating heat that made the air inside the walls unbearable. Water grew scarce. Food was rationed to the point of absurdity. Diseases began to spread among the defenders packed into ever smaller spaces. And every night, when silence fell over the city, the sound of Ottoman shovels continued. The sappers dug tunnels beneath Vienna's foundations, filling them with barrels of gunpowder. The underground explosions became a constant nightmare. Entire sections of the wall collapsed without warning, leaving breaches that the defenders had to close in haste while arrows whistled over their heads. Night counterattacks became frequent. Small groups of Viennese soldiers crawled outside the walls under cover of darkness, seeking enemy tunnels to destroy them before they completed their deadly work. Some returned. Many did not. Starhemberg was wounded during one of these incursions. A musket ball pierced his shoulder, but he refused to abandon his post. With his arm bandaged and soaked in blood, he continued walking the walls, and his hoarse voice continued giving orders. The men who saw him understood something fundamental. If the Count could remain standing, they had no excuse to fall. Outside the walls, Kara Mustafa was beginning to grow impatient. He had promised the Sultan a quick and clean victory, but weeks passed and Vienna resisted. His officers begged him to order a general assault, to use the numerical superiority to crush the defenders once and for all. But the Grand Vizier refused. Every direct assault would cost thousands of lives and deliver him a devastated city. He wanted complete glory. He wanted to enter Vienna as a conqueror, not as a destroyer. It was a mistake he would pay dearly for, because while the Ottomans dug and bombarded, while Vienna slowly agonized, something was moving in the north. Messengers rode day and night through the mountains. Armies gathered in secret, and a king was preparing the charge that would change history. Hundreds of kilometers from Vienna, in the Kingdom of Poland, a man received each dispatch with growing urgency. John III Sobieski, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, had built his reputation on the corpses of Christendom's enemies. Tall and stout, with a beard framing a face weathered by decades of war, Sobieski was everything Europe needed at that moment. A warrior who knew no fear. A year earlier, Poland and the Holy Roman Empire had signed the Treaty of Warsaw, a defensive alliance that obligated each party to come to the other's aid if the Ottomans attacked. When news of the siege reached Krakow, Sobieski did not hesitate. He summoned his generals, gathered his troops, and began marching south before political objections could stop him. The force that Sobieski brought with him was formidable. More than 20,000 Polish soldiers, among them the absolute elite of the army, the Winged Hussar. No military unit in Europe resembled the Hussars. They were the heavy shock cavalry of the Polish kingdom, recruited exclusively from the nobility. Each Hussar provided his own horse, his own armor, and his own weapons, and each of them had been trained since childhood in the art of mounted warfare. But what made them truly unique was their appearance. They wore polished plate armor that gleamed like mirrors under the sun. Leopard and bear skins covered their shoulders. Lances nearly 6 meters long, hollow and light but deadly, protruded from their formations like a forest of steel. And on their backs, attached to their armor or saddle, they bore the wings. They were wooden structures, arched upward, covered with eagle, vulture, or falcon feathers. Some reached 1/2 meter above the rider's head. No one knew for certain why they wore them. Some said the wings produced a terrifying sound when the cavalry charged, a ghostly whistle that drove enemy horses mad. Others believed they protected the rider's back against saber attacks or Tatar lassos. But everyone agreed on one thing. When the Winged Hussars appeared on the battlefield, they seemed like creatures from another world. The march to Vienna was brutal. The Polish troops crossed mountains, forded rivers, and dragged artillery along roads that barely deserved the name. But Sobieski did not allow the pace to slacken. Every day lost was another day that Vienna had to resist alone. Every hour counted. In early September, the Polish forces crossed the Danube 30 kilometers from Vienna and joined the Holy Roman Empire troops that had been awaiting their arrival. The Duke Charles of Lorraine commanded the imperial forces, along with contingents from Saxony, Bavaria, and other German states. Together, they numbered nearly 70,000 men. It was an impressive force, but still inferior in number to the Ottoman army. Sobieski assumed supreme command without discussion. He was the highest-ranking officer present and the only one with real experience fighting the Ottomans. On the night of September 11th, as his troops camped in the forests north of Vienna, the Polish king observed the glow of Ottoman campfires in the valley. He knew what would come at dawn. He knew that the charge he was about to order would determine the fate of a continent. Before dawn on September 12th, the Christian soldiers attended Mass in the ruins of a small church atop Mount Kahlenberg. Father Marco Daviano, a Capuchin monk who had accompanied the army, celebrated the service while the sun began to paint the horizon orange. John Sobieski served as an assistant at that Mass. When it ended, he rose, looked at his men, and simply nodded. No speeches were needed. Everyone knew what they had to do. The battle began at dawn with a coordinated advance from the heights. The imperial troops descended on the left flank, clashing with Ottoman positions in the vineyards and villages north of Vienna. The fighting was fierce. The Janissaries defended every meter of ground with the ferocity of veterans who had never known defeat. But slowly, inexorably, the Christian lines advanced. Kara Mustafa received the reports with growing alarm. He had underestimated the speed of the relief army. He had left too many men in the trenches surrounding Vienna instead of preparing them to defend the camp. Now his forces were divided, trapped between the city's defenders and the army descending from the mountains. Throughout the day, the battle spread across the valley. Villages changed hands multiple times. The smoke of gunfire clouded the sun. The cries of the dying mixed with the roar of cannons. But Sobieski waited. He watched. He calculated. In mid-afternoon, when shadows began to lengthen and the Ottoman lines showed signs of fatigue, the Polish king gave the order. What followed was one of the most devastating cavalry charges in military history. From the crests of Kahlenberg, 20,000 riders began to descend. At the front rode 3,000 Winged Hussars, a line of steel and feathers stretching for nearly 2 kilometers. Behind them, the Polish heavy cavalry and imperial riders formed successive waves of destruction. The ground trembled under the weight of the hooves. The air filled with the sound of wings vibrating in the wind, a sharp and unsettling whistle that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Sobieski rode at the head of his hussars. His armor was covered by a blue cloak of oriental silk. His saber flashed in the evening light. When he raised his arm and pointed forward, no words were needed. The charge had begun. The Ottomans saw the avalanche coming too late. The first lines tried to form to receive the impact, but the hussars fell upon them with a force that no wall of shields could stop. The 6-meter lances pierced armor as if it were cloth. Horses crashed into horses. Men flew through the air. The noise was deafening, metal against metal, war cries, the neighing of maddened animals. The hussars did not stop. They broke through the first Ottoman line and kept going. They broke through the second and the third. Behind them, the Polish cavalry swept away the remnants of resistance like an overflowing river, carrying everything in its path. Panic spread through the Ottoman camp. Enemy horses bolted at the whistle of the wings. The janissaries, who throughout their lives had been the hunters, now became the prey. Formations disintegrated. Men ran in every direction, tripping over tent ropes, falling into trenches they themselves had dug. Kara Mustafa, from his green tent, watched as his army crumbled before his eyes. He tried to regroup his guards, to order a counterattack, but it was too late. The green standard of Islam fell when a group of hussars swept through the Grand Vizier's tent. Kara Mustafa barely had time to mount his horse and flee east, abandoning everything, his treasure, his cannons, his glory. The charge lasted less than an hour. When it ended, the largest army the Ottomans had assembled in generations lay shattered in the valley of Vienna. When the sun sank behind the western hills, the plain before Vienna had transformed into a cemetery. Torn tents fluttered in the wind. Fallen standards lay trampled in the mud. Abandoned cannons pointed toward a sky that no longer mattered. And among the remains of the Ottoman camp, Christian soldiers walked in silence, too exhausted to celebrate, too overwhelmed to comprehend the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Within the walls of Vienna, the defenders first heard the thunder of the charge, then the screams, then the silence. And finally, when messengers arrived confirming that the relief army had triumphed, men who had endured 60 days of hell collapsed weeping, not from joy, but from sheer exhaustion. The nightmare was over. Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, with his arm bandaged and his face covered in dust and dried blood, came out to meet John Sobieski when the Polish king rode toward the city gates. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. There were no fanfares or elaborate speeches. Starhemberg simply bowed his head and murmured something the chronicles did not record. But anyone who had been present would have understood the meaning. A dying city had just been resurrected because a foreign king had kept his word. Sobieski dismounted slowly. His armor was splattered with Ottoman blood. His eyes showed the fatigue of weeks of marching and hours of combat. But when he looked at the walls of Vienna, still standing despite everything, a smile crossed his face. He would later write to his wife Marysienka a letter that would become famous. "We came, we saw, and God conquered." For Kara Mustafa, the flight was only the beginning of the end. He rode east with the remnants of his army, trying to regroup forces, inventing excuses. He blamed his subordinates. He executed officers who might have testified about his mistakes. He sent messages to the Sultan, assuring him that the defeat had been a mere interruption. that next spring he would march on Vienna again. But Sultan Mehmed IV was in no mood for excuses. Kara Mustafa's enemies at court used the disaster to poison the monarch's mind. Letters arrived day after day, describing the humiliation, the losses, the abandoned treasure. And finally, on December 13th, the Sultan signed the execution order. On the 25th of December, 1683, while Christian Europe celebrated Christmas, a messenger arrived in Belgrade, where Kara Mustafa had taken refuge. He carried no letters or written orders, only a silk cord. The Grand Vizier understood immediately what it meant. In the Ottoman Empire, high-ranking officials were not beheaded or hanged. They were strangled with a silk cord, a silent end to avoid the shedding of noble blood. Kara Mustafa bowed his head. It is said that his last words were simply, "As God wills." When the cord tightened around his neck, the Ottoman dream of conquering Europe died with him. The victory at Vienna resonated across the entire continent. In Rome, the Pope ordered the bells of every church to ring for days. In Paris, even the court of Louis XIV, which had secretly hoped for a Habsburg defeat, had to acknowledge the magnitude of the triumph. In Poland, Sobieski was received as a hero of biblical proportions. Poets wrote odes to his glory. Painters immortalized the charge of the Hussars on canvases that still today adorn the museums of Europe. But beyond the immediate celebration, the Battle of Vienna marked something deeper, a turning point in the history of the world. For more than 2 centuries, the Ottoman Empire had advanced relentlessly westward. After 1683, it would never again attempt a conquest of that magnitude. The balance of power had been reversed forever. The following years would see Christian armies push eastward, recovering Hungary, Transylvania, and vast territories that had been under Ottoman control for generations. The Treaty of Karlowitz, signed in 1699, formalized what the charge of the Winged Hussars had begun, the end of Ottoman expansion in Europe. And yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of that September afternoon was neither political nor military. It was something more intangible. It was the demonstration that unity, courage, and determination could overcome even the most overwhelming forces. It was proof that empires, however powerful they may seem, can be stopped by those who refuse to kneel. The Winged Hussars ceased to exist as a military force at the end of the 18th century, surpassed by changes in military technology. But their image, the wings spread, the lances gleaming, the unstoppable charge, survives in the collective memory of Europe. Every time someone speaks of impossible courage, of victories against all odds, of moments when history turned on its axis, the echo of that afternoon in Vienna still resonates. Because on a battlefield covered in smoke and blood, a Polish king and 3,000 winged warriors proved that there are forces more powerful than numbers. There are forces that cannot be counted or measured. And when those forces are unleashed, even empires tremble. The centuries have passed. The walls of Vienna have long since ceased to need defenders. The Ottoman Empire turned to dust, just like all empires before and after it, and the wings of the Hussars now hang silent in museums, behind glass that protects them from time. But if you walk through the streets of Vienna on a September afternoon, when the sun descends toward the west and the shadows begin to lengthen, perhaps you can hear something, a distant echo, a whistle in the wind, the ghost of a sound that once made an empire tremble. It is the echo of the wings, the echo of that charge, the echo of a moment when a few men decided that history was not yet written. And they were right.